So I was raised in a pro-life home. My parents were pro-life. When I was 11, my parents got divorced. And my dad changed his opinions to pro-choice. My mom kind of changed a few times, but it was more of a, I wouldn't do it, but it's okay if other people do. And that was kind of my stance at one point for about a year. And I was mad at pro-lifers. My parents got divorced. And my dad changed his opinions to pro-choice. My mom kind of changed a few times, but it was more of a, I wouldn't do it, but it's okay if other people do. And that was kind of my stance at one point for about a year. And I was mad at pro-lifers. The reason why I was pro-choice for a time was because I believed the lie that there are women that are, because of abortion laws, there are women that are being imprisoned and enjailed for, is that a word?
I think so.
It is now. Enjailed for miscarriages, which is not actually true. If you actually look up what's going on, that's not true. But I believed that. So my faith story and my pro-life story kind of coincide. I got a life-changing experience. I was kind of a lukewarm Christian until February 21st, 2021. It was a big day. There's a reason I remember that date. So it's almost been 3 years. So this February will be 3 years since I've truly given my life to God, and that's all I care about, really. And after that, the Lord just slowly convicted me about it. It wasn't actually a super quick change and wanted only what he has for me. I got different friends, and those strong Christian friends were pro-life. And I stand by that, because I stand by the fact that strong Christian friends, if you're going to have strong Christian friends, they're most likely pro-life. Because there are righteous people, and then there are people that have the fear of the Lord. And people that have the fear of the Lord are pro-life, because the fear of the Lord is simply to love what God loves and to hate what God hates. And God hates abortion. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, but later in the podcast. But yeah, therefore, I want friends that are going to love what God loves and hate what God hates. And this is part of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, you said about your parents and your position in that year, but what was before that? How were you before that? Did you have a position? Were you thinking about pro-life, or it wasn't really an issue for you?
It wasn't really an issue for me, besides the fact that I remember I believed before, when I was pro-life, that there should be exceptions for rape and incest, and I no longer think that. But I was pretty pro-life at that time, but I wasn't necessarily involved, mostly because I was a kid. And it's kind of weird talking about when you're a kid, because you're mostly getting your opinions from your parents, so you're not necessarily having your own opinion. When you're older, you have your own opinion.
Yeah, I think this is one of the reasons why we have to have good parents and to have prepared parents. And when you became pro-life, was there a specific moment that literally changed your heart, or was it something gradual?
It was very gradual, but I feel like there was definitely big moments. There was definitely a moment where I learned about what actually happens during an abortion procedure. And after you learn about what happens during an abortion procedure, and I wasn't necessarily shown a video or anything, but I was just told about what actually happens. And once you're told that, you can't unsee it. There's images that come with it, and there's so much vivid imagery, even if it's described in a very scientific way.
Many people don't know what an abortion looks like. And sometimes some people kind of shove it under the rug when they hear about it, or just I don't care, even if it's like that, I don't care. So it's I know people who also, or I watched videos of people who were shown a video of an abortion, they didn't know what it looks like, and they changed their mind on the spot. And so it's interesting to see like a real life example. I'm talking to a real life example about it. So yeah, it's wonderful. But so this was one of the, let's say, moments that kind of make you think more about what abortion is. What does being pro-life mean to you?
Being pro-life means that you value life at all stages, no matter whether or not it's an elder, because elders tend to be treated like they're useless, and they're not. But it also means valuing life just in general. Like, as soon as life starts, it's valuable just because they're made in the image of God, and so therefore they're valuable. They don't have to do anything. They don't have to say anything. They don't have to think anything. They're valuable just simply because they're human and they're made in the image of God. You value people no matter whether or not they're pro-life or not. Like, people are valuable simply because they are, even if they're your enemy per se. I try not to label people as enemy, because that has a view of it that starts to make you not love them. And Jesus says to love your enemies. So
yeah, I totally agree with this. Yes. Can you tell us a little bit about the activity of Students for Life group that you're leading? How does a Students for Life campus group work there in the United States? Also specifically for your group, but also generally for, other groups that you maybe talk to.
Yeah, there's a big difference between different groups, because this is a complicated issue. Our verse of the year is love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. 1 Corinthians 13:6. And the reason why is because the truth is complicated. I think both sides can very much simplify the matter and just be like, oh, it's murder, so therefore ... Let's not engage with the other complexities of the issue. But there's so many complexities that every group has to do a little bit different, has to focus a little bit more on one thing. So one of those things is like women. You can go in the women route, where it talks about, like, a lot of these women talk about the pill and how it can kill women if not administered properly, and how abortion affects mental health and stuff like that. You can go the racism route, where you talk about Margaret Sanger. And Margaret Sanger is a fun... Margaret Sanger, if your people don't know, that Margaret Sanger is the founder of Planned Parenthood, and she wrote a book that's probably kind of generalizes all of her opinions as far as this goes, called Women in the New Race. And it's basically a book about how women... I read the first chapter, and the first chapter is basically how women have this right, this power to control the population, basically. And she wrote some really awful things, including the American Baby Code, which was supposed to go into law. But there's a lot of people that... I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but there's a lot of people that go that route and talk about the history of Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood and why it's basically eugenics. That's what it was designed to do. And then there is the baby route, where we're just talking about the baby mostly, obviously going into all those other topics, but mostly talking about the baby and the right to life. And then there's the religious route. I guess this is kind of a route, I would say. Most Students for Life go for the religious, or there's some sort of religiosity in it. But most of them also have science involved. But there's some that don't do any religion, and they're all about science. I know, so I live in Spokane. Whitworth is in Spokane, Washington, and not Washington, D.C. And there's another college, Gonzaga Students for Life, and they don't have religion involved in their pro-life club at all, because they can make their argument with science, which I agree with. You can make your argument with science. You don't need religion to make your argument. There are awesome secular people who make some really good arguments about abortion. Mm-hmm. It also kind of depends on your state as well. To get more into my group specifically, it depends on your state. Some people who have traveled to America have figured out really quickly that once you cross the state line, it's like a whole different country. It's very different. That's how they've described it. They're like, it's a whole different country, but it's still technically the same country, because there's just a different culture. There's a different history to it. In every state, there's something unique about that state that makes it run a little different, makes the attitudes of the people different. So it feels like you're kind of in a different country. So it kind of depends on the state as well. What, for one thing, I mean, Roe v. Wade, there's different laws in different states, so you're focusing on different things there. So in Washington, abortion is legal, but it is not legal in Idaho, which is right next to us. We're actually right on the border of Idaho. So we actually, and because it's illegal in Idaho, we actually have a lot more abortions in Washington this year and after Roe v. Wade was overturned, because people are just coming to Spokane to get their abortions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can I ask you, I know this is not a prepared question, but I think you can answer it. Can you tell us a little bit about your view on the issue of abortion, but from this perspective that in a state it's illegal and women go to another state to have abortions? Why do you think that's happening?
Well, I know when Roe v. Wade was overturned, a lot of workforces were, like you said, I'm a history major. I keep on going to history. But a lot of workforces made this promise to their women that said, we will pay for you to go to another state and we will pay for your abortion. What that sounds like to me is we do not want to pay for maternity leave. Mm-hmm. We do not want to worry about you having to leave in the middle of work because of a family emergency, because your child is maybe at school or daycare and got injured. We don't want to worry about that. So we want you to be back at work, making us money, which is really not helping them at all, because if we don't have the next generation, they're not going to have a workforce. So I find it interesting. I mean, where I work, there's pregnant women coming in now all the time, and my coworkers are very pregnant. Obviously, we support life. We don't take a stance on pro-life, pro-choice things, but obviously there's some sort of support of having children at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you said the right word, support. Support, it's the thing that makes the difference. If women don't have support and they only have one choice, because many times they have only one real choice, let's put it that way. Everyone encourages them to have abortions and they are not offered another option, another choice. They'll go that way because they don't know, or the pressure is so big that they are not able to choose freely the other option. They don't have that strength to do that. So support is the thing that makes a difference. I totally agree with you, and I think this is very important to point out as one of the conclusions of what you said. Yeah. What activities are you doing on campus with students?
So we're doing lots of. I'm really excited for your next question, actually, because I got some real fun stuff that's going on right now. The activities that we're doing, we do National Pro-Life Chalk Day. I'm sure you know about that. I'm sure you've seen
I saw a couple of posts. Yeah, they look great.
Yeah, you've seen our posts as well as probably other people's. And so National Pro-Life Chalk Day happened this last Tuesday. It was awesome. I loved it. It's my favorite day out of the entire year.
Really?
Or the entire semester, because we do it twice a year. Just because it gets our message out there, and it gets people. The chalk was actually the first time I learned that there was a pro-life movement on campus. I came in as a freshman and was like, Whitworth's a little progressive. I'm a little worried. Like, do we have anything that's pro-life? And do they make a stance? I learned very quickly they don't. Whitworth does not take a stance. But I came in and I was like, I really hope we have something. And then I saw the chalk, and it was such an encouragement to me, because I was like, there is a pro-life movement. There are people that value life on campus. And so we do chalk. Chalk is my favorite. Speakers, which gets an interesting, different reaction than chalk. And then social media presence is a big thing that's changing this year, is that we're trying to do a little bit more social media presence, because people are really, really nasty on social media. And I don't like to victimize myself. So I like to use that to my advantage. One of the things we tried to do was do a Q&A, but there's a theme going on that is, if I ask for it, if I ask for for some sort of response from the pro-choice movement and the pro-choice community here, I don't get it. But if I don't ask, I get it. I get it a lot. I'll talk about that. The chalk was very interesting this year, different reaction than other years. And then we work with local organizations, Life Services of Spokane in particular. So they do a lot of stuff. They just rebranded as Life Services Spokane. They used to be My Choice, because of that same thing that you were just saying, that, women only feel like, a lot of their clients came in and said, women only feel like they have one choice, and that is abortion. Because they're told by everyone else that's the easier option. It's the more fulfilling option somehow. That comes out, that it's supposed to be more fulfilling, because your career is apparently really fulfilling. A career that you will be replaced in very quickly. You can't be replaced as a mother. No one can replace that.
Yeah. And if I may, no one can replace your child either. So.
No, exactly. That isn't a replaceable. Every single human being is unique. So you can't replace that. Ever. You can't replace it. Yeah. Honestly, the life service is where most of our time goes. So right now we're trying to get a volunteer day worked out. So we're all going to go over to life services and volunteer. We promote different events. One of the events that's coming up on the 30th is called The Unexamined Life. And it's basically about all the questions about abortion. So we have speakers also from their local organizations that will come and talk about abortion. And it's just a really good way to get people involved, even if they can't necessarily go to meetings.
Now, as you are studying a major in history, I would like to ask you about the history of slavery. I know it's a big thing there. Did it impress you? Do you think there is a connection, a resemblance between slavery and abortion?
Yes, and yes. Like all the yeses. I just took a course. I'm taking a course right now called American History Before 1877. It is what it sounds like. Whitworth decides to do the cutoff at Reconstruction, which is interesting. Whitworth really cares about racism, and I actually want to use that to my advantage. I do try to focus on women specifically, and racism is like one of the things that we kind of focus on. because those are topics that Whitworth cares about, that our speakers often are talking about, women and, mostly slavery. It's mostly about like systemic racism is a lot of our speakers and what they talk about. So I'm trying to lean into that and kind of talk about hard things like the foster care system and as well as racism within I haven't got a speaker yet that will talk about that, but the Leadership Institute will probably give me some speakers that will talk about that, which will be super helpful because it's a very little known history about it. But slavery is in that course, Unit 1, we talked a lot about slavery and how it became the slavery that we have had in America. Like it's American slavery was very unique. Slavery was happening for years. It was called indentured servitude at the time. And then in America, it changed. And so in our class, we learned about how gradually it changed. It didn't change quickly. We didn't suddenly we had indentured servitude. We came from Britain, went to the United States, although it wasn't called the United States, the colonies. And then suddenly we just decided we're going to have hereditary slavery and it's going to be lifelong. Like that was something that was crazy. If you told someone in 1619 that, oh, by the way, American slavery is when you have your children your children are going to be enslaved and it's based on race, they would be like, you're insane. That would never happen. But it did very quickly. It was gradual, but it was quick. They started changing the language of law. So at first, you couldn't enslave a Christian. It was illegal to enslave a Christian. And that was through indentured servitude. So you couldn't. So indentured servitude was about 4 to 7 years. It's how the colonies became a thing. So a lot of poor people were they wanted to start. They were losing jobs in Britain. There wasn't enough jobs for all the people. So that's part of why the colonies were settled, was to give more jobs to people. And so what they did is if you were lower class, if you're a peasant class, they were like, well, you have this opportunity. You can go to the colonies. You can go to this new world. There was people there, but you can go to this new world and you can have this, and you can be in indentured servitude and you are promised land and a good start, basically. Right after indentured servitude, it lasts for 7 years. A lot of them died during that time because this was a lot of the first slaves went to Jamestown in America, and Jamestown was not settled by anyone. And there was a reason for that. They found out very quickly. There was a reason why no one wanted that land. It was because nothing could grow there, basically. So they came. So these indentured servants would often die during the 7 year. But if they survived the 7 years, they would then get land and some money, some goods, basically a good start to their life. But of course, then the land they couldn't do that because the land there was less and less land. So we needed to do something. We needed to solve this issue. And so it was really a practical decision, which is often interesting because connecting it to abortion, oftentimes people use the practical, oh, the woman's not ready for it, whatever. They justified slavery through practical means. And they wanted it became cheaper if you could make it hereditary, as in the next generation would also be enslaved. That was cheaper because then it was a self-sustaining. You didn't have to go buy more slaves after your slave died. They have children now, and you can enslave those people. And it also justified rape. So one of the things that they changed the language of women and how this hereditary thing was about women. If your mother was enslaved, then you were enslaved, not the father. If your father was free and your mother was a slave, you were a slave. or I don't want to say you are a slave because that's not who you are, but you were then enslaved, and that justified masters raping women and then enslaving their own children, really, which is kind of sad, which also connects. Like, I didn't even realize that connection until now, but that connects as well. Enslaving your own children, like that's really sad to think about enslaving. Just the idea of wanting to enslave your own children is just for power. It's the same thing with abortion, is you are enslaving people just for abortion. And then to go with racism, how they changed language to be race-based. Before it was white and black slaves were slaves together. But they changed it to be, it was more Africans, like Africans were slaves. And I say Africans because at the time it was much more like they had a connection to Africa at that time. So like that shift and that, it used to be racially fluid, like racial things were more about nationality. They're more about, oh, I'm European, or I'm African, or I'm Native American. Those were about nationalities. But then it split off into, you were either a person of color or you were white. And so that change in language changed the way. And again, the change in language is really, really important. Clump of cells, parasite, those are different language to describe, or fetus. Fetus, I don't think, is a bad word to say, because a fetus is just a part. It's the same thing as saying toddler, or I'm sure you guys hear this all the time in the podcast. It's the same as saying toddler or infant or adolescent. It's just a different stage of life.
Exactly.
So that connection, and of course then Margaret Sanger basically wanted to abolish that. She was afraid that the Black community would rise. And I'm a firm believer, since I'm a history major, that there are, when you look at history, it tells you something about what the devil finds threatening. And what the devil finds threatening is therefore valuable to God. Like, God has a plan for those people. And the Black community is very, very much targeted. Slavery, for starters. And then abortion is also something that has targeted the Black community. And this continual attack on the Black community shows me that God values the Black community, because otherwise, I believe we live in a spiritual world. So Satan wouldn't be attacking this community so much if there wasn't some sort of like specific plan that the Lord has for that community. And I'm a firm believer in that. That also applies to women, of course, because this is also an attack on women, because abortion doesn't help women. It's not helpful to women. It actually hurts women because, like I said before, you can do your career and be in your career, but if you can be replaced in your career like that. Like, your qualifications don't make you who you are. But as a mother, no one can replace that. And no one can replace your child. And that's really important. That's why I recommend that anyone that's had an abortion, even if they seem to not regret it, I'm like, go to post-abortion counseling, because that's traumatic. That's a traumatic experience. So it's not for women. It's not helpful to women. There's 1,000 reasons why it's not helpful for women, but it's not helpful.
Yeah. You talked a lot about this already in the beginning, about when you said about your life story, and also now in this answer about God and how God sees abortion and sees this issue, basically. Let's maybe go a little deeper. What do you think? How do you think God sees these things?
Well, first of all, he created everyone in his image. He knit everyone together in his mother's womb. Psalm 135, 39, not 35, 139 verses 13 through 16 says, "For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame is not hidden from you. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place." Intricately woven. I really like that term. Intricately woven. That's why I picked the ESV version of it. "In the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them." It's just, that's such a beautiful picture of the Lord knew you and valued you before you were knitted together, but he valued you. The next verses talk about how God's thoughts about you outnumber the sand on the shores. Like, that's a lot. Like, God thinks about you that much, and he thought about you that much, not only during conception, right when you were conceived, but before that. So therefore, you're valuable. You're valuable once, as soon as you are starting, that clump of cells is valuable. To God, that's valuable to him. He made you in his own image. And then there's Jeremiah 1:5, which kind of talks about that more of that he has a purpose and a plan for you. "Before I formed you in your womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations." The Lord appoints people for their goal, for their whatever your life's mission is, that is specific to you and unique to you, when you were in your mother's womb. Not when you were outside of it, not when you were born. You weren't consecrated then. You were consecrated in your mother's womb. And also, I'm going to talk about Molech a lot. Jeremiah hated abortion with passion. That's where he got his name, Weeping Prophet. He went down to, I'm not sure specifically what chapter it talks about, but it talks about like going down to the place outside of Jerusalem, to where they worshipped other gods. It just says they worshipped other gods. And he saw the bones, he saw dry bones, and he wept. If you read that in context, that is the worship of Molech. They were worshiping Baal, Ishtar, and Molech. So Baal is, I'm sure you know about Baal a little bit. Baal is lots of, basically, if you worship Baal and Ishtar, you're worshiping sex, is exactly what's happening there. Ishtar is the Asherah poles, if you don't know about that. And basically, they would have, like, in order to have prosperity, you would basically have orgies to have prosperity. The more sex you had, the more prosperity you would get. But alongside that worship was the worship of Molech, which is often kind of, no one wants to talk about it, and it's awful. So Molech was a god who was a god of child sacrifice. That's what he was a god of. And he, when you worship sex, I've heard it said like this: if you worship sex, you're going to sacrifice your children. So they would burn these children in a fire, which is alive. They would be alive when this happened. And this was for prosperity's sake. Again, he was a harvest god who would give you prosperity if you basically sacrificed your infants to him. And you would throw him in a fire, and there would be loud drums that would be played so that you couldn't hear the children's screams. Which sounds really, really awful, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's awful. But now we can't hear children's screams because their vocal cords haven't been developed. And they try to scream. If you see a video of an actual abortion, they open their mouths to scream. They can feel things. Like, it's the same thing. It just looks prettier. We made it look pretty. We made it we called it healthcare, and we made it look pretty. We don't like to tell people what actually happens during abortion, because that rips off that Band-Aid of, oh, this is pretty. This is a pretty thing that happens. It's not pretty when you actually look at what happens. We don't burn them or cut their hearts out like the Aztecs did. The Aztecs cut their babies' hearts out to appease the gods of rain and war. We don't do those things. But nothing new is under the sun, according to Ecclesiastes. And so therefore, this is just modern day child sacrifice. It might look different, it might look prettier, but it's the same thing. We sacrifice our children on the altar of convenience. We sacrifice our children on the altar of power. Same thing, this prosperity aspect. Out of a right standing in the career, going back to work, right? And we sacrifice our children to free sex. Same thing with the whole Baal and Ishtar worship. When you're worshiping sex, you sacrifice your children.
Yeah, this kind of people running after pleasure and neglecting responsibility and don't wanting to take responsibility. Yeah, basically that's the main reason, let's say, that for abortion. Mm-hmm. Just this kind of constant pleasure, to follow. That's basically what you also talked about. Yeah. And may I also say that you said about that silent scream? I couldn't just remember about the silent scream, the short movie of Bernard Nathanson that I'm pretty sure you know. Most people know about it.
Yes,
yeah.
It's very trigger warning is very needed if you're going to go watch it.
Yeah, but it's very important for people to watch it. So we'll put that in the description too, so people can watch it. Yeah. Chloe, it's been a real pleasure to have this opportunity to discuss with you and to listen to your thoughts on the pro-life issue. What you're doing there in the United States is extremely important. And I really, really hope that you'll become a big pro-life leader in the United States. If that's what you want and you want to work toward that, that's you have all my support, because it's important to have people in this mission, as many as possible.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me.